Hello, my name is Marcus. I'm the compiler of a collection of therapy quotes entitled Psychoanalytic Self-Awareness Quotes. This is TQ 588 and 589. Therapy quote number 588. Some therapists tend to minimize the role of unconscious fantasy activity and emphasize the pathogenic effect of real events and interactions. But the individual's experience, explains Arlo, quote, is usually organized in terms of a few leading unconscious fantasies which dominate an individual's perception of the world and create the mental set by which she or he perceives and interprets her or his experience, unquote. Transference, in his view, expresses derivatives of the client's persistent unconscious childhood fantasies, the, quote, psychic reality of these early interactions. So I thought this would be a good follow-up to the video made 2 days ago. Yeah, about transference triggers. There was a video made about the video series called Dora in Treatment, Part 3, Object Relations Unit. And he was talking about transference triggers, how most of a person's emotional reactions are due to perceptions based on the inner world. The outer world just served as a trigger for what's going on in the inner world. So it wasn't really necessary to focus too much on the outer world. If you heal the inner world, you're not so affected by trifles in the outer world. That was his main point. So this just sort of adds to that, all right? But he uses some interesting vocabulary here. He says unconscious fantasy activity. Okay. Unconscious fantasy activity. Thought that was interesting. So again, we're talking about, let's look at the psychic reality or the inner world. If you heal the inner world, the activities in the outer world, especially when they're trivial, but they provoke strong emotions inwardly, that relates to inner conflicts or what's unhealed in the inner world. Basically, the childhood trauma is still in the unconscious memory or the implicit memory system, and it's trying to work its way through, kind of thing. So yes, something on the outside is important to a degree, but at some point, why not pause and look at what got triggered inwardly, try to heal the inner world, and then you'll notice that other thing in the outside was nothing really, right? This sort of reminds me about the topic of anxiety, because when the main definition of anxiety is something unknown. You're afraid of something from the inner world and you don't know what it is. So some of this unconscious fantasy activity, he says here. Masterson has this axiom. He says, self-activation leads to abandonment depression or anxiety, or massive anxiety, let's say, and that which leads to defense. So his one of his ideas is that if a person self-activates, does something from his real self, okay, something that's genuine and unique to his individual wishes and his unique personality or something like that. In other words, he's not doing something out of the repetition compulsion of trying to master childhood trauma. He wants to do something from his real self. At that point, that'll trigger anxiety, because in the unconscious, when the child had a wish, sometimes the mother was satisfying and attuned, but sometimes she was rejecting. If the rejecting memories outweigh the frustrating memories, then the person gives up his individual wishes. So now as an adult, let's say he wants to express his individual wishes from his real self. That's going to trigger the childhood memories. He's calling that the abandonment depression or the anxiety about that. And it's unknown to the person, right? And his formulation is that self-activation triggers WORU, the withdrawing object relations unit. The withdrawing object relations unit is, in the very beginning, babies create two images of the other and self. So you have the satisfying image of the mother, okay, and then the image of the self is that the child is loved. So that's the rewarding object relations unit. And then it's split, so that now, likewise, the times when the mother was unavailable, okay, so she withdrew her love, okay, so that's the withdrawing object relations unit, and the self part and the part self representation linked to this part other representation, okay, that part self feels unloved and devalued and all that, and that's called the withdrawing object relations unit. The satisfying unit is called the RORU, rewarding object relations unit. So Masterson has this thing about the RORU and the WORU. So these are object relations unit, and that's due to the splitting defense mechanism. So remember, the baby temporarily splits the image of his representation of his mother into these two. Okay, the satisfying, the frustrating. It's meant to be a temporary mechanism to deal with the anxiety, because babies come out of the womb too early, and no mother can be perfect after the womb. So the baby, to deal with that anxiety of this imperfection, he creates two images of the mother. But at the age of 6 months, when the loving memories outweigh the frustrating memories, the images come together to form a whole realistic representation of the other and a whole realistic image of the self, and that's called a stage of differentiation. From birth to 6 months, as mentioned, as covered in previous videos, that's called the stage of undifferentiation. It's the extended womb, or the stage of symbiosis and fusion, where the baby doesn't know where he ends and his mother begins. It's an extension of the womb life, really, right? So, as mentioned as well in previous videos, there's biological birth, which is a visible event, okay? And ideally, the baby is handed in one motion to the mother. All the hormones are there, so the bonding and the continuity is there. The cord stays, the placenta can come out a little later, can sit in a bowl. The cord and the placenta belong to the child. That's a part of his support system. You want to keep that there. You want to ease the transition. You don't want to shock there at birth. You want to create an extended womb, so the baby feels warm and comforted. There's no interruption. You minimize any interruptions in the birth process. So in other words, there's an extended womb, and this extended womb is meant to be as safe and warm and attuned and comfortable as the physical womb was for the biological birth. This extended womb is just as important for the psychological birth to follow at the age of 3. Now this extended womb, we call it a symbiotic egg, metaphorical egg. And then at the age of 6 months, the baby psychologically hatches out of the egg. But it's not like a one-time event. This hatching process takes 2.5 years. And then at the age of 3, okay, when the satisfying memories outweigh the frustrating memories, the image of the other is a whole, the image of the self is the whole. The child has internalized all of the supportive memories from the mother, and that becomes part of his psychic structure. Okay, it's a part of him now. That's called the holding interject, or the internalized good object. And with all that inner safety and security, he's internalized, right? Now he feels so safe, his life force can attach to his image of himself. That's the psychological birth. And with that inner security, he now can have access to his real self. Okay, the real self is a part of him that has a variety of capacities as described by Masterson. You know, the ability for mutual intimacy, to know your individual wishes, to not feel guilty, to feel you know, not to not feel guilty if you're successful, for example, to feel appropriately entitled to be successful, or to have mastery over a skill, or to learn something. You don't feel unconsciously punished, or you don't feel unconsciously that you're going to betray your mother if you learn how to play the guitar or something, you know, or do something you like. So that's the psychological birth, ideally, right? So back to the first 6 months during the phase of splitting. Okay, this is meant to be existential hearsay at the psychological birth. It's no longer needed. By and large, with the psychological birth, people are seen realistically as human beings, and we see ourselves as human beings, commonality of our humanness and things like that, right? Ubuntu, right? Empathy and understanding, and all of the human emotions are there. Love and gratitude, the ability to feel gratitude, right? And the ability to make amends and feel sorry and regret for any harm accidentally caused, and so on. So love and gratitude enter the psychological picture at the age of 6 months, when the splits begin to come together. See, prior to that, okay, the baby's still in that limbo. He's still dealing with the anxiety of the mother being too rewarding or too frustrating, right? Now, if there's a developmental trauma and the splits don't get to come together, because this occurs when the frustrating memories outweigh the satisfying memories, then the splits are still there. He's still trying to deal with the anxiety of the rejecting mother, part mother, right? Or part representation of the mother, or part image of the mother. He's still caught dealing with that. Now he's in a lifelong battle with his mother, so to speak. That's a developmental trauma, and this can take many forms. If it's very early on in this symbiosis phase, it can lead to the hostile provocative attachment style, where the person is hostile and provocative to communicate that he didn't get his symbiotic needs met. If it happens maybe a little bit later on, this can be the narcissistic pattern, where the person identifies with the aggressor, does to others what was done to him to communicate what was done to him, right? And we've covered that in previous videos. So during this splitting period, the baby creates 2 images of the other and 2 images of the self, and they're linked by feelings. Okay. So Masterson says, if there's developmental trauma, if this splitting doesn't get resolved by the age of 3 and it's still there, now as an adult, if he wants to do something from his real wishes, he's gonna be reminded unconsciously. So there's the anxiety of the mother rejecting the child's autonomy, or the mother not being available for the child's individuation. So the baby felt a lot of anxiety when his needs weren't met, right? And if the child's needs don't get met, he never gets to internalize good enough love. He never gets to have access to his real self. But let's say as an adult, he wants to have access to his real self. He's going to be reminded of all of the frustrating memories. So there can be anxiety from those old ancient memories, the unconscious fantasy, right? The ancient memories come up. So self-activation leads to this great anxiety, right? The WORU, the withdrawing object relations unit, and that leads to defense. So to deal with the anxiety, then you do something that represents the rewarding mother. You might binge eat. Food represents mother's love, so you might binge eat. Right? So anxiety, that's one idea around anxiety. A second idea around anxiety is Bergler's theory, is that anxiety is when you don't square accounts with your superego. He has this theory that, I'm simplifying it by calling it the 4 steps. So think about it this way. With an insecure attachment style, by the way. We're not talking about the secure attachment style. So with an insecure attachment style, that means the mother's was more unavailable than available to meet the child's needs. Okay. That's the insecure attachment style. And then because of that, the split is still there. Okay. And that splitting precludes access to the real self. Splitting precludes love and gratitude. Splitting precludes the ability to mourn losses. That can lead to stress on stress, complicated grief, aggravated grief, chronic sorrow, pathological nostalgia, melancholia. That can lead to, as one person said, to developing the symptoms of PTSD, and that can lead to one becoming a curmudgeon, not an elder, you know. So splitting precludes so much. So there's such a real huge focus in object relations theory to heal the splits, right? So that's an insecure attachment style. So we're talking about the insecure attachment style. Bergler says, think of it this way. The baby has a wish for mother's love. It gets rejected. The baby wants to protest. He can't because he doesn't have the motor skills. Doesn't have the language even. Now he feels defeated. So there's 4 steps. That's a developmental trauma. When there's a trauma, we want to repeat that sequence to try to master it. Now as an adult, if he wants to have a wish, okay, the deep memory of those 4 steps, let's call that the superego. The superego is going to say no. Remember what happened? So the child had a wish, it got refused. The superego said no. But the psyche it has to honor that when there's a trauma, the person's going to try to master the trauma. Okay? So the superego makes a compromise with the person and says, well, you can do some pseudo-aggressive activity, but it's going to be self-defeating because in the end, just like the baby felt defeated, you're going to live the unlived life. Okay? So whatever pseudo-activity the person engages in, whatever lifestyle or belief system or so on, all of that is meant to be at the end of his life or throughout his life an unlived life because he didn't face the original trauma of the insecure attachment style. He's ignoring it. Bergler has this theory called psychic masochism. Right? So we've covered that in previous videos. Bergler says, anxiety is when you don't square accounts with your superego. The superego says you can only do some pseudo-activity, pseudo-aggression. You can't do something from the real self because you didn't get a secure attachment style. You need a secure attachment style to be able to do something from the real self. And if you ignore that, fine, we'll let you try to master the trauma, but it's Sisyphus. You're not facing the truth of what happened. Okay, you're just covering over with the pseudo-activity. So the person engages in pseudo-activity. Now when that gets exhausted, or the person gets tired of the pseudo-activity, that's going to bring up anxiety of the truth, that the baby was unloved enough. And there's the anxiety there. So that's another theory about anxiety. A third sort of part theory on anxiety is TQ 589. There's some jargon here. A lot of jargon is not meant to be taken literally when you first hear it. It's sort of a metaphorical, let's say. You know. So here's TQ 589 from Fairbairn. The conflict underlying. Okay, so Fairbairn's theory on one aspect of anxiety, he's calling it when the splitting is still there, to deal with the anxiety of the splits, okay, so he says the person can adopt 4 techniques. So he's calling them techniques. So these are not, so just keep that in mind, techniques. So these are devices or techniques or maneuvers, let's say. So to deal with anxiety, a person may use 4 techniques. So anxiety, again, is primarily when the person has developmental trauma. People with a secure attachment style are comfortable with themselves, they're relaxed, they're happier, you know, they're successful in love and work, and they're satisfied people, you know. Their marriages are like fine wine, you know. People with an insecure attachment style, they're caught repeating the childhood drama. Their marriages are conflict habituated, hostile dependent, or there's emotional divorce, or at best there's this passive-aggressive compromise, you know. So it's sour, like sour milk. The marriage is like sour milk or something, or bitter or something like that. So we're talking about the insecure attachment style. When the splitting is still there, that's going to cause a lot of anxiety. Okay, so Fairbairn talks about at one point the 4 techniques around this. It's not a perfect theory. I kind of like Masterson's. I like Masterson's idea. I like Bergler's idea. I'm not all that clear on this third one, but I want to think about it and put it out there for future consideration. So maybe later on. Some of my posts are just exploratory, and then in future videos I kind of pick up on it and clarify it as I go along. So I'd like to think if you're following the series, you're seeing the progression of the understanding taking place. So sometimes if something doesn't make sense, so forgive me, I it's hard to present a whole thing in one video. For me, it's hard to do that. Okay, so here's TQ 589 to deal with splitting. The conflict, so the 4 techniques, the conflict underlying the phobic state, that's one technique, the phobic state, may be concisely formulated as one between flight to the object and flight from the object. In both cases, the object is treated as external. In the obsessional, okay, so that's one technique. He's calling it the phobic technique. So he's saying when the splitting is there, the person is going to project the satisfying representation of the mother onto a person, and at the same time they're going to project the rejecting image of the mother, the other, onto the other person. So now they look at the other person and they're seeing both. I want to move towards this person. I need this person's love. Oh, but this person is like the rejecting mother. So there's a real fear around that, or anxiety, let's say. So this anxiety, he says, is due to the phobic technique. Again, I want to emphasize this, the phobic technique. So the phobic technique leading to anxiety is that the person sees both the satisfying image of the other, part other, and the rejecting image of the part other. But the rejecting image outweighs the satisfying image, but the person still wants the satisfying image, but the rejecting image outweighs it. So there's a real fear there. So you see, that's why it's phobic. The person is very afraid of the other, whatever it may be. It doesn't have to be a person, anything, right? So there's the phobia, the phobic technique, right? Because remember, in the splitting defense mechanism, the frustrating memories outweigh the satisfying memories. Okay. Now, in the phobic technique, the person projects the two sides, the two parts onto, let's just say, the other person. They move towards that other person because they want that other person's love, but at the same time, they know unconsciously that this person is more rejecting than satisfying. So there's a real fear there. He doesn't know why he's feeling so much anxiety. So phobia is a huge anxiety, let's say, right? Okay, so that's the phobic technique. Okay, so there are 4 techniques here. So the second technique is what's called the obsessional technique. In the obsessional state, the conflict presents itself as one between the expulsion and the retention of contents. Both the accepted and the rejected objects are treated as internal. So here, the person wants the internal satisfying image of the mother. Now this is internal. In the phobic, he projected both outwardly. In the obsessional, he keeps them both in. But what's in? He wants to reject the rejecting image of the mother, but he can't. He wants to keep the satisfying image of the mother. Okay? So there's a huge inner conflict there. So he's obsessional. Means there's a lot of anxiety. And I think my guess is the show of this is that the person is obsessional. OCD is very obsessed about things. He wants extreme order to manage this internal anxiety because he sees inwardly this inner conflict, and he wants to maybe try to control the situation so that inwardly he feels that's he can't get rid of the rejecting image of the mother, and he can't get more of the satisfying image of the mother, because to do so triggers the rejecting image of the mother. So he wants a lot of order, so he's obsessional about things, very orderly, let's say. Okay, so there's a little difference there. I'm not fully sure about this, to be honest with you. The phobic one I can understand. The phobic one is the person projects both the good and bad onto the other, but the bad outweighs the good, so he's afraid. Imagine that inwardly. So now he has anxiety, and this shows by the person being maybe having OCD or something, or that kind of thing. Too much control to deal with the anxiety. I'm not really sure about that second technique. The next technique I'm a little more familiar with. So the third technique is the hysterical technique. We're talking about technique here, so focus on the idea of technique. And if a person uses one of these four techniques or any combination of these techniques, it can lead to anxiety, right? In the hysterical state or overly emotional state, let's say, it is the accepted object that is externalized. Okay? Okay, so in the phobic state, the person projects both the accepted and the rejected object. So the satisfying object and the frustrating object. He projects both of them onto the outside person, let's say, and he's phobic of that person. He needs that person, he wants that person's love, but he's overly afraid of that person. So there's that phobic response and the anxiety from that. Okay. Let's say the person projects the satisfying image, only the satisfying image of the other onto the other. And he doesn't project the rejecting image of the mother onto the other. Okay, he keeps it within. So now there's a lot of emotionality because he has a great overvaluation of the other person. He wildly overvalues the other person because he's looking for the satisfying, he's looking for more love. So he overvalues the other person. Okay, he's trying to win that person's love. At the same time, the rejecting image of the other, he keeps to himself. Now he berates himself. So he berates himself unconsciously, or the rejecting image of his memories is berating him, let's say. And at the same time, he's overvaluing the other person. So there's a lot of romantic love with that, right? You have this great, wild, romantic fantasy of the other person because you overvalued them. Okay. You're not afraid of them. You want them. It's a desirable thing. You're yearning for that romantic love. Okay. That might be like the codependent sort of pattern, right? And the rejecting image of the mother is berating the person inwardly. So there's a lot of emotionality around this. That's why he's calling it the hysterical technique. You're feeling bad this way, then you're feeling excited outwardly, but you're feeling bad inwardly, you know. So he's calling that the hysterical technique, right? Which could lead, and because we're not aware of these techniques, there's the anxiety. Anxiety is when you're not aware of. Anxiety is you're not aware of either the threat of the loss of love or the threat of the loss of mother's approval, right? That's the childhood situation. Okay, the fourth technique, I think maybe is a little more familiar in general. Okay, whereas in the paranoid technique or state, okay, the object which is externalized is the rejected object. Okay, so another way to deal with the splitting defense mechanism is to project the rejecting image of the other onto non-threatening substitute others. Okay, now you're feeling anxiety because you think that other person is rejecting or frustrating or whatever. Okay, so he's calling that the paranoid technique, where you project the rejecting image of the mother, because it's too hard to keep it within. Look at that obsessional person. He's so obsessed within. So, okay, to deal with the anxiety of that, maybe he'll project the rejecting image onto the other. And then now, because he may, because at the same time he's identified with the rejecting image of the mother. At the same time, he's identified with the rejecting image of the mother, but he projects the rejecting image of the mother onto non-threatening substitute others. Okay, so now he wants to do to the other what was done to him. See, it's really, it's all four techniques are extremely convoluted, chaotic, severely confused scenarios of how the person is trying to cope with the anxiety of this splitting still there. That's why everyone is saying, or many people are saying, we've got to heal the splits. We've got to heal the situation where the frustrating memories of the mother outweigh the satisfying memories of the mother. Otherwise, it can lead to the use of these four techniques. Right? That's severely dysfunctional, right? So 3 approaches or 3 ideas around anxiety. The fundamental concept is in 588. 588. Some therapists tend to minimize the role of unconscious fantasy activity and emphasize the pathogenic effect of real events and interactions. But the individual's experience, quote, is usually organized in terms of a few leading unconscious fantasies which dominate an individual's perception of the world and create a mental set by which she or he perceives and interprets her or his experience. Transference expresses derivatives of a person's persistent unconscious childhood fantasies or the psychic reality of these interactions. Okay, the psychic reality of these interactions, that goes back to the idea that when the child has memories of the parent, he's not keeping memories of the actual parent. The child's memories of the parent are these fairy tale images of the parent, these wildly exaggerated images. So when the mother's unsatisfying, in the child's psyche, that's a witch, monster, boogeyman, frightening animal, bad god in mythology or demon in mythology and so on, right? The satisfying image of the mother is goddess, angel, fairy godmother, helpful character in a fairy tale, or you see? So the child's images of the mother are these fairy tale mythological characters and creatures. So this is the psychic reality. See, to go through life from the reference point of this psychic reality can create a lot of anxiety over nothing, really, trifles, And then sometimes what we do is we want to preserve the splits. So we want to create situations to justify the splits and therefore remaining loyal to the unconscious rejecting image of the mother. We're loyal to the unconscious rejecting image of the mother because, as Fairbairn says, the more rejecting, unavailable, alluring, disappointing, enticing, disappointing, the more frustrating the mother is, the more the baby needs the mother, the more the baby is overly attached to the mother and can't let go of the mother. Because it's just, life force is object seeking. A baby comes out, he has to bond to the mother. The more rejecting the mother is, the more the baby's going to bond to the mother. You can think about like the Stockholm Syndrome almost, or something like that. No, that's not a good example, but right? Ironically, the more loving the mother is, the more satisfying the mother is. Hold on, we got a visitor here. Let's see, how many can he... Look at that, he's got a whole... You must have 4 or 5 peanuts in there, right? Oh, there he goes. Okay. such a beautiful circular swooping motion they make, you know. They're so graceful and beautiful, the birds, and my goodness. So maybe we'll get another appearance by the crow or the blue jay before the end of this video. Okay, yeah, looking at birds calms me down, deals with my anxiety, right? Okay, so, oh, I got another one. Oh, hold on. No, I thought another one was gonna come. See, what happened was two of them are getting in position to come. See, one's in the tree and one's by the edge there, at the edge of the lawn. And I think these two are gonna make an appearance. I don't see the blue jays. Okay, so the main idea is I think very well expressed in TQ 588, that we're seeing the world not really as it actually is, but through the childhood images that the child creates of his interactions with his parents. The child sees things in pictures, so they create images. These pictures are wildly exaggerated because of the fears, because the baby's so helpless and small and dependent. So from the baby's point of view, a misattunement by the mother is a very frightening experience, and the mother is perceived as a monster, right? Yesterday's video was if the child's basic feeding and love didn't get met, that can lead to the greed, and the image around that was the wolf in the Red Riding Hood tale, you see. And then in the narcissistic pattern, the person identifies with that image and then becomes, right? So the grandmother became the wolf, identification with the aggressor. I refer you to yesterday's video on that one. So the point is, fairy tales and myths are true on the inside. They're trying to describe the baby's experiences of being not loved enough. So fairy tales and myths talk about what's true on the inside, right? The defense mechanism of splitting is vividly portrayed. It's the primary motif, okay? It's the primary psychological motif expressed, okay, represented through fairy tales and myths, is the love and hate, okay? Is the so-called battle between love and hate, right? And you see, so this is the ambivalence the baby has towards the mother. The baby loves the mother, needs the mother, internalizes some, wants more, but the rejecting mother is there. So the baby is caught in this huge dilemma. Sometimes it's overwhelming, too overwhelming, and the child identifies with the aggressor. That's the narcissistic pattern. And then he does to others what was done to him, to communicate what was done to him. Okay, this can lead to emotionally to the schizoid phenomena, where the person emotionally is shut in. Okay, now he can see. Now he's able, with that, he's able to objectify others because the mother objectified him. If the mother is more rejecting than satisfying, the child interprets that as being objectified, not being treated, respected as a little human being, as a little person. You know, I think some self-help author said, wouldn't it be great if every baby came out with a little pamphlet, and the baby were to hand this pamphlet to the mother, and it said, "Dear mother, nature gave me this to give to you. It says that I'm a little human being, and I have these rights, and I need this and this and this." So babies don't come out with a little constitution to give to the mother or something. The mothers are supposed to be attuned and know that intuitively. To facilitate mother's ability to be attuned to the child's needs, breastfeeding is encouraged. That helps the mother to be attuned. I was very sad. I in this one magazine article I remember a while ago, there was an advertisement for breast pumps. I was very sad, and there were testimonials about that. One testimonial was, "Oh, I don't have to breastfeed. I just put the milk in this little pump machine thing, put it in the bottle, and then I can feed the baby with the bottle." Wow, why? Why? The essence of motherhood is breastfeeding. Why would you deny the essence of being a mother? And another author said that makes it more difficult for the mother to feel attuned to the baby. Okay, so um, of course the breast milk is better than the powdered stuff, but we're talking about the mother matching the child's needs, being attuned, having that rhythm with the baby. Because in the womb, the baby was in this rhythm and all of his needs were met. The extended womb is meant to be a continuation of that. It's a continued womb. I don't think that's emphasized enough. That's a huge thing. If I can't help but think if every mother offered a safe, secure, extended womb to allow the baby into the differentiation subphase of the separation individuation process, where the child creates an image of the other as a whole other and an image of the self as a whole self, and they're separate. And this, of course, takes 2.5 years. That's the psychological birth. We're good. See? Splitting precludes mourning. One author said, all therapy is about mourning. All of the problems that a person or that we have in the world is because we're not mourning. Why? Because splitting precludes mourning. When the splitting is there, how does a person mourn unconscious images of the other as a goddess or a demon? How do you mourn something like that? You can only mourn a realistic person, and your feelings are related to that. So, hold on a sec. We might have another visitor here. Well, I was hoping I might be able to catch him do a nice little flying leap onto the table, but it looks like he's just going to stand there. Okay, so just now we were talking about how therapy is about mourning, but in order to mourn, we have to heal the splits because splitting precludes mourning. So how do we heal the splits? We have to face the truth. The person, when they were a baby, okay, that person experienced more times when the mother was misattuned than when she was attuned to the baby's needs. For example, the mother was using a bottle and didn't know when the baby was hungry or not hungry. She followed a schedule. One person called the bottle the unfeeling breast. That can lead to the schizoid pattern, maybe right there. Who knows? He called it the alexithymic breast. The actual breast is, he called the psychosomatic breast versus the alexithymic breast. The alexithymic breast, or the bottle, means there's no feeling. All right. Oh, hold on. I think we might get a leap here. A little one. Okay. He's the younger one. I noticed the more experienced. Yeah, the earlier one was the more experienced one. He's the younger one, right? By the way, I looked up in some traditional cultures, the crow is an important character in their storytelling. The crow is the guardian of spiritual laws, or let's say psychological laws. So maybe the crow is not a bad little animal guide in this series. Hold on, another one. Oh, he changed his mind. Okay, I'll have to look more into it. But all I read was crow is connected to spiritual laws. I don't know how exactly, but I thought it was interesting that 100,000 years ago, people thought in that way of the crow. He had more respect back then, right? Okay, so in the process of trying to heal the splits, that's going to create a lot of anxiety. Okay, so when we're facing the unconscious ambivalence, that's going to bring up a lot of those memories, you see. So we need to build the ego, understand that supports having a relationship to our inner world, okay, and that can build the ego and strengthen the ego, and then the psyche feels safe enough to bring up the rejecting image, the memories of the frustrating mother, and there's anxiety around that. So we mentioned before, in the splitting defense mechanism, we have two object relations units in the psyche: the wo-ru, the withdrawing object relations unit, and the ro-ru, the rewarding object relations unit, where the mother rewarded the child for regression. If the child was helpless and dependent and all that, the mother rewarded him. If the child wanted to be autonomous and leave the mother, the mother withdrew her support. Now with reading and let's say having experience positive life experiences, or to be with a therapist, a person wants to create a new relational unit, okay, where the representation of others supports the person's growth, okay. So all of the memories of interacting with another person, let's say the therapist, who's supportive and supports the person's healing. Now you have a representation of the other in that way. That's linked to a representation of the self that is supportive for autonomy. Now you have this new psychic structure, and that's the third way that helps to bridge the splits. When the splits come together, that's whole object relating. With whole object relating, the life force is decathected from the rejecting image of the mother. Now the life force is available for the self. Robert Bly says, get the key out from under mother's pillow. That's what he's talking about. You want to decathect your attachment to the rejecting image of the mother. It's very difficult with the narcissistic pattern, because in the narcissistic pattern, the person's life force is overly attached to the rejecting image of the mother, and then the person identifies with the rejecting image of the mother. So it's very hard for him to decathect, because he feels like he's losing himself because he's identified with her or it, right? You know, the image, it, right? So there's a lot going on in the inner world. So this whole series is about trying to understand this inner world. If we heal the inner world, we see things realistically. We're not projecting unconscious fairy tale fantasies outwardly, and then we're afraid that way. Or one version of the paranoid technique, okay, is that if a person projects the rejecting image of the frustrating mother onto the other, all of the anger that the baby had originally, now in the repetition compulsion, the person wants to express all of his anger towards his mother. You see what's happening here? So the baby couldn't express his anger towards his mother. Now, as an adult, he projects that image of the frustrating mother onto a non-threatening, safe, substitute, benign other, right? Safe other. Okay, that's a secondary delusion. That other person didn't do anything, right? But they're in this unconscious fantasy that other person is the rejecting image of the mother. Now they're going to create lies and rationalization to convince themselves that's the case. Why? Because they want to express the anger towards the mother. You see? So these are huge delusions and distortions. Projection is distortion of reality. All of these infantile immature defense mechanisms distort reality. All defense mechanisms distort reality to some degree. But these immature, these primal early ones, like splitting, projective identification, displacement, repetition, compulsion, gone awry, acting out, all the rationalizations in support of it, That's all meant to be existential hearsay by the age of 3. Existential hearsay by the age of 3. So in the adult world, if someone has these kind of prejudicial, all this all good, that all bad, these kind of extreme, they're coming from the babyhood reference point of the mother being more frustrating than loving. Okay, so the solution is, let's support mothers to offer that extended womb, right? And every father can help in that process. And someone said, it's not even the quantity of the milk that's available in the mother, it's the relationship. If the mother's attuned and is meeting the baby's needs that way, that's okay. It's good enough. There are a variety of versions of good enough. The mother just needs to be good enough. That means the satisfying attuned memories outweigh the frustrating misattuned memories. And if the splitting is still there, the therapy process is to heal the splits, right? Because splitting precludes mourning, splitting precludes access to the real self. Okay, and as mentioned in a previous video, when there's a developmental trauma, that gets recorded on the metaphor is a music playing disc, an LP, vinyl, one of those long playing record discs. It gets recorded on there. A person with developmental trauma or with an insecure attachment style, so let's just say the neurotic, every neurotic carries this record with him. Everywhere he goes, he only has this one record. And in every new situation, he plays that record. He's bringing the past, he's repeating in the present. And it's Sisyphus, he just keeps playing that record. Nothing gets healed, you don't change the past. He just keeps playing that record, right? So he's acting out and he's not remembering, he's just repeating. So you repeat and don't remember, okay? And that preserves the splits. Or you talk about it and remember. Or you observe yourself and remember. You self-reflect and you remember. Okay, look in the mirror and remember. That kind of thing. Heal the man in the mirror, as the song says. I should play that, huh? Michael Jackson, Man in the Mirror. Okay, I guess I'll just leave it here. I don't see the blue jay, but there is a blue sky. That's nice. So this has been a little bit more on the idea of transference. Okay, how we project our childhood psychic, quote, psychic reality into the present. Isn't there a famous quote that says we don't see things as they are, we see things as we are? Similar idea, right? And we had an introduction to the idea of Fairbairn's idea of techniques in relation to the splitting defense mechanism. If there's more information about these 4 techniques, I'll follow up with it. So far, that's my first introduction to it there, or my first reference. That's all I know about it so far with these 4 techniques. That's in this came from the second article in his book, The Psychoanalytic Studies of Personality. That's a good book. Yeah. Fairbairn didn't formally write a book, but all of his papers have been compiled into 3 books. So those 3 books hold most or all of his, most of his papers are kept in these 3 books. A huge contribution. Oh, it's a lot of information there. Fairbairn, as mentioned before, Fairbairn, okay, object relations theory. Melanie Klein, splitting and projective identification. Okay, James Masterson, combining those 2 with Margaret Mahler's developmental theory. Okay, so there's 3 there. Margaret Mahler, the separation individuation process and the psychological birth. Edmund Berger's theory of the 4 steps I mentioned, and Karen Horney, who keeps things grounded and human. She's the humanist in all of this, right? Yeah, those six really to to my mind, those 6 authors really offer an immense amount of hope and light at the end of the tunnel for healing developmental trauma. I highly recommend those 6 authors. So this series is about Margaret Mahler's developmental theory of the separation individuation process leading to the psychological birth. Okay, the extended womb we talked about, and then going through those 4 subphases. Okay, that's Margaret Mahler. Okay, object relations theory. Okay, by Fairbairn. Masterson brings them together, called the Masterson approach. That's the Ro-Ru and the Wo-Ru, healing the splits. The splits, the idea of that comes from Melanie Klein, and then she says, to preserve the splits, we may project onto others, coax others to act that role, and then use rationalizations to lie to ourselves that that person represents the rejecting image of the other. Okay, so that's preserving the splits. Bergler comes at it from a whole different angle, his theory, and then Karen Horney adds a lot of, she articulates very well about the humanism of keeping this all human. We're human beings first, and we have these traumas that we're trying to heal from. Right? So she's the number one reminder that nobody's being labeled here. It's not about that. You see, healing is, if you're labeling, healing stops. You can't label someone, because that puts someone in a box. That's preserving the splits. All right. Once you label, you're preserving the split. Yeah. Okay, I'll leave it here. We'll have more from Melanie Klein, Fairbairn, Masterson, Bergler, Mahler, and Karen Horney. We'll have more from them in future videos. Okay, this has been TQ 588 and 589. More to follow. Thank you very much. Bye for now.